2020 has felt like the longest year we have ever experienced, with unprecedented events making the world feel unpleasant, we'll say. But thankfully, we have had a smorgasbord of games to see us through this difficult year. And once again, we have had some genuinely incredible games come out, from the absolute phenomenon that was Animal Crossing to the unprecedented hits like Fall Guys and Call of Duty Warzone, as well as some long-awaited sequels like Ori and a certain post-apocalyptic title. Yeah, Doom Eternal. I'm talking about Doom Eternal. And that's without even mentioning that we have a brand new and exciting generation of PlayStation and Xboxes to see out the year too. So as is tradition here on YouTube, let's talk about some of the best. Welcome to Easy Game. My name is Luke and this is my top 5 games of 2020.
You'll face all manner of ailments during diagnosis.
Astrobot Rescue Mission was a great surprise back in 2018, taking a character from multiple playable tech demos, and from those humble origins creating a game labelled as PSVR's Mario 64. So as you can imagine, I was more than a little underwhelmed when Astro's Playroom was announced, and it wasn't a follow-up to that game. It seemed to be just yet another tech demo for the PS5, but begrudgingly I accepted it and moved on. I always knew I would play the game as it was coming free and pre-installed on the PS5, but I never, not once, envisioned it would be the game that made me smile the most this year. From the opening moments until I popped that platinum trophy, I was filled with unabashed and unrelenting joy. Nostalgia is a powerful tool when used effectively, and Asobi and Japan Studio did just that. From stumbling across scenes from iconic PlayStation franchises being filmed to the grand and wonderfully presented models of numerous PlayStation artifacts that are sure to warm even the most jaded of gamers. If Astrobot Rescue Mission is the Mario 64 PlayStation, then I would argue Astro's Playroom is the mini Super Mario Odyssey. And let's not forget how seamlessly and incredibly well Astro does at demonstrating the power of the PlayStation 5, and more importantly the DualSense, wonderfully showing players how cool it feels when you crush, pull and, for example, use a bow and arrow with the new adaptive triggers, as well as the more precise motion controls and touchpad getting their time in the spotlight too. Genuinely, the only reason this isn't higher on the list is due to a few of the suits being a bit cumbersome, but even then it couldn't displace the smile that Astrobot had once again planted on my face. My cheeks genuinely still hurt. Spider-Man Miles Morales had a whole lot to live up to. Not only did it have its predecessor, the great Spider-Man PS4, but it also had the practically faultless Into the Spider-Verse that Miles would inevitably be held up to. And after the slightly disappointing City That Never Sleeps DLC, I was a little bit skeptical. However, Insomniac are masters of their craft and delivered a much more personal story than before. There are no grand team-ups, nor is there talk of saving the world. Miles is a much smaller experience compared to Spider-Man PS4, and that's not just in terms of time to beat. While still allowing you to make use of the entirety of the snow globe version of Manhattan, the story revolves around Harlem for the most part, and only involves a handful of characters. As a result, these characters feel very fleshed out for the most part. Each one is explored and is well understood regardless of where they sit on the hero to villain scale. The combat has been refined, with Miles not sporting as many gadgets as the more experienced Peter, but the addition of Miles' extra powers more than make up for that and make Miles more fun to play with as a result. There's a lot more you could do with Miles and his mix of powers and gadgets than you could with Peter previously. I personally loved making Miles as stealthy as I possibly could, which was made incredibly fun with his new camo abilities. Miles of course takes a lot of what was great about Spider-Man PS4 and thrips away the not so great bits. For instance, no longer do you have to spend hours swinging around and waiting for specific crimes to spawn in each region. Now you can merely complete one of each crime as well as each of their 2 bonus challenges. Of course, the game is not perfect. I found it a little difficult to really invest in certain characters, and a few storyline inaccuracies did pull me out of the experience from time to time, but they were more than made up 4, with Miles and friends being so charming, endearing, and simply fun to play as. I found myself once again doing absolutely everything in the game. Every side quest, time capsule, and sound sample were promptly found, collected, and completed. I've adored the MCU for the past 10 years, but I'm genuinely more excited for where Insomniac take me next. Whether I get a co-op Peter and Miles, or it's a joint story playing through each character section by section, or one at a time like Nier Automata. Yes, I squeezed a Nier Automata reference. I just can't wait to get back to New York City and live in their world some more.
My time now. My time.
So,
As someone who hadn't played the original game at the time, I had only experienced a lot of the original Final Fantasy VII secondhand through friends, YouTube listicles and video essays, but nonetheless I was aware of not only the importance of the game, but its dedicated following as well. Despite not having any nostalgia or real affinity with the original game, when the remake was announced, I got chills, but I was still very wary. I'd never really been into the Final Fantasy series. I'd played a few of them as a child, but I didn't understand them back then, and ever since I'd always wanted to dip my toe, but I never really knew where to start, and Final Fantasy VII Remake was going to be the perfect chance for me to start my journey. I was able to play a demo at EGX in 2019, and most of my doubt drifted away, kinda like Sephiroth's hair in a gentle breeze. Final Fantasy VII released at a perfect time because I'd only just gone into isolation, so I could spend all of the time I had with the game, and that is exactly what I did. I was enthralled by everything, the characters, the setting, and especially the iconic music. Even now, just hearing the prologue theme makes me a little giddy. The combat was a near perfect evolution of both what had come previously in Final Fantasy titles and the Kingdom Hearts real-time strategy combat, and the visuals were incredible, apart from that one bit that is just a big old JPEG and some poor textures, but we'll just skip over that for now. The character models look so unbelievably good, but they are still unequivocally those same iconic characters from 1997. And the story, many were skeptical of Square filling out such a small portion of the original game, but they needn't have worried. It's such a well told and effective story of its own, not to mention how it twists the original narrative to subtly hint that this is not just a remake and that it is in fact a sequel to the iconic original, and yes, I still believe that to be true. It can be corny and some of the dialogue is a bit iffy, but it is all done with tongue firmly planted in cheek. I fell in love with every character, from Cloud and Tifa to the incomparably fallible Johnny. Each and every character is absolutely oozing with charm, thanks not only to the incredible character models and animations, but also thanks to the great performances from their actors. They all sound more or less how you would have imagined they do, from the soft and innocent Aerith to the polar opposite of the stoic and fixated Sephiroth. And boy oh boy was he handled expertly. From Cloud seeing apparitions of him and hearing whispers and rumours of Sephiroth for hours before feeling the tension spike at just the thought that he had arrived. Finally to the moment he came face to face with the heroes. Sephiroth's aura was built so incredibly throughout the game, and when it comes time to face off against the one-winged angel, I honestly had a bit of a knot in my stomach. The biggest of biggest chef's kisses. Everything just fits so well together, with each part of the game papering over a few of the cracks to become more than the sum of its parts. If it wasn't for my belief that this is in fact a sequel to the original game and not a remake, I would honestly call it the best remake to date, and I cannot wait for the rest of the story to unfold.
and the planet.
The placement of Hades on this list was the most difficult decision I had to make. Throughout a lot of my 100+ hour playthrough, Hades was my game of the year. It feels like the culmination of everything that the incredibly talented team at Supergiant Games have made since 2009. The storytelling is masterful, with the way Supergiant have weaved the narrative with the game genre perfectly, which gives you the motivation to keep pushing after every single death. I fell in love with every single character, especially Charon, both through the wonderfully witty and charming dialogue and the incredibly designed character models. The visuals are striking and the music is exceptional on its own, but teamed with the gameplay, it is truly masterful. And the combat somehow doesn't get the slightest bit tiresome even after 100 hours of play. Subsequently, nor does dying. Failure is never truly failure in Hades, and that's what makes going on run after run after run after run compelling. Every single character character is endearing almost beyond belief, and you are constantly pushing the narrative forward, even if only in small increments at times. But death is never for nothing. You always gain something from a run, no matter how far you get, be it knowledge, narrative, progression, or gems. Every single piece that builds the puzzle of Hades is immaculate. That being said, for me, Supergiant just didn't quite stick the landing. The ending pulled me out of the game a bit, and even then, it's a fantastic executed ending, and it fits perfectly into the puzzle. It just wasn't where I was expecting the game to go. But despite my not even really disappointment with literally just the ending, Hades is a masterpiece of its genre, and then some. In a year with some truly mammoth launches, it speaks to the quality of the comparably small Supergiant games that Hades is not only keeping pace with numerous blockbusters, but beating them on multiple fronts. And that's without even being available on the PlayStation or Xbox as of yet. As I said in my recent review of Hades, it is the most cohesive game of the entire generation, and I still stand by that. As wonderful as each individual piece of the game is, they all complement each other so well and somehow work so much better together than apart. It is truly a marvel. Hades is Supergiant's magnum opus, and I cannot envision a way that they could possibly top this. It genuinely feels like this is what Supergiant have been building towards for over a decade, and maybe it is. Perhaps after mastering the roguelike, they move on to another genre and master that until they complete the infinity gauntlet of gaming and just become the most powerful entity in the gaming universe.
That was for last time.
I know you wish things were different.
The Last of Us Part 2 was my most anticipated game of the year. I replayed the original masterpiece, its DLC, and read through the prequel graphic novel in preparation to be enveloped in the story that Naughty Dog had poured their souls into. And despite its controversies, I was not disappointed at all. I'll freely admit, I not only didn't think The Last of Us needed a sequel or a continuation, I was also a little trepidatious. I wasn't sure that the sequel could live up to its predecessor and would be worthy of following up on one of the greatest video game narratives ever, but thankfully that couldn't have been further from reality. Not only was The Last of Us Part 2 a worthy follow-up to the original, telling an emotional and bold story that became a lot darker than its predecessor, in my mind it is one of the best sequels ever. It took characters we knew and loved and evolved them in realistic ways that made sense given the events of the first game. And this wasn't just your run-of-the-mill sequel. There are ramifications from the first game that play out in the second, which is where a lot of the unwarranted hate comes from. Naughty Dog knew some of the bold choices made in Part 2 would anger some fans, but that did not stop them from telling the story that they felt needed to be told, and the game is all the better for it. Everything in The Last of Us Part 2 feels like an evolution from Part 1, from combat and characters to the environment and the soundtrack. Everything was familiar, yet felt new enough. Stealth in particular felt incredible, being much improved from the first game and genuinely being the best stealth mechanics in some time. The Last of Us Part 2 feels a lot like The Empire Strikes Back or The Last Jedi of video games. They made a lot of audacious choices that left some fans angry despite its overwhelmingly positive critical reception. And no, I'm not talking about Ellie being gay, because that was hinted at pretty early in the original game and established in Left Behind. The Last of Us Part 2 blew all of my expectations out of the water, and even when the game went in a different direction to the one in my head, it was never a disappointing one. Part 2 made me not only rethink a lot of things about the first, including character motivations, but also made me see things from a viewpoint that I was determined I would not, and Abby is the embodiment of that. Her story makes you look at Joel and Ellie in a much different light, and if you let it, the game will double down and show you once again that there are no heroes in The Last of Us, but equally there are no villains either. There is a reason for every action, justifiable or not. Thank you for watching. Not just this video, but any one of the reviews or dumb rambly videos that I've put out this year. I will be back very soon with the darker side of this coin, but in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, give the video a like if you liked it, and maybe share it with your friends, and why not check out some of my other videos. But before I go, be sure to check out our Game Leader discussion over on the Game for All podcast. Once again, thank you for watching, and now I'm going to go make a dent in my ever-growing backlog of video games.